Hi everyone, and really hello and welcome to another of our coffee and chat series. I haven't had time to grab a coffee today, so I've got very much an empty mug today, which is a little bit alarming as it's lunchtime. It being Friday, occasionally that's not full of coffee or tea, but today it's not full of either of them. So I'm really glad today that we are talking about what I think is a really important subject, specifically in this new virtual world that we're living in, informal learning. And we have two of the top specialists in the country in UK who are going to talk with us on this subject matter. I'd like to introduce you to Paul Matthews and Laura Overton. I suspect most of you that have come into this chat room are familiar with both of their pieces of work, because that's why you're here rather than listening to me per se. But informal learning is one of these areas that we have been emphasising really in the last 20 odd years within learning and development, and suggesting that far more needs to happen within informal learning. I was mulling over the problem of informal learning about a month ago and reached out to Paul and said, well, how are we doing this then in a virtual world? Because unlike in an actual world, when we are all working in the same location, virtual worlds put a whole load of constraints on us, so that an individual can't necessarily just reach out at the water cooler and figure out with their colleagues what they need to actually grow and develop in their own personal areas. So we're talking about a very different area, and that's why I was really excited to be able to ask both Laura and Paul to come and join us today. Laura's just joined a brand new team who specialise in this area, and I know that she'll bring some of that in. So really, guys, over to you. Are we in a completely different world because of living in a COVID environment and very much in a virtual world?
No. We're still the same human animal that we were a few months ago. We still learn very much the same way we used to learn. Yes, the environment that surrounds us has changed a bit, and as you say, has some constraints. But if you think about it, how much people have learned informally and rapidly in the last couple of months, how to use Zoom, how to have a christening on Zoom, how to have a family barbecue on Zoom, so people have learned so much. And yet if you go and ask anybody, what did you learn in the last 3 months? They probably won't refer to any of that. So most of the informal learning that's going on, we're just completely unaware of it, any more than that we're aware of the oxygen that we breathe. So, yeah, I'm saying stuff hasn't changed as much as what people, from a learning perspective, is what a lot of people might think it has.
I was really alarmed the other day. I was working with a group of scouts, and they instantly went to all of the tools on Zoom that I had taken some time to learn. So yeah, I can see your point. How about yourself, Laura? What do you think?
Well, I agree completely. Obviously, you know, we're all been learning new things. I've been thrown into a new team and into Microsoft Teams, and I'm working my way around it. But I think what is interesting, what is different, is that because every single one of us has been thrown into a brand new context where we're a lot more aware of our vulnerabilities, I think possibly we might be a lot more aware of the fact that we are learning things informally, because the period's been so intense. You know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas normally, you know, we would perhaps be picking things up in the workflow through a challenging situation. We might be cognizant of the fact that we're actually learning something through this experience, or it might be just something we're just doing unconsciously because that's work. You know, adapting and getting on board with something new is work. We don't necessarily call it learning. But I think possibly in the last few months, we've actually seen informal learning as we've been perhaps more aware of it, more aware that I'm not doing this well. I'm not taking control of my own learning well. I feel a little bit overwhelmed, and I think possibly might be more aware of that as a result of the intensity of what everyone's been going through at the moment. So I think that's an amazing opportunity for learning and development professionals. But I don't know about you, or perhaps even the listeners. It'd be amazing to hear the listeners' view in the chat box as well. So, you know, hopefully it's not just going to be the three of us. I'm really keen to find out what other people are thinking.
Yeah, I
I think
completely
one
agree.
of the phrases that I often use is we learn from difference, not from sameness.
Yeah.
And when there's difference, then we have an opportunity to learn. If everything's the same, actually, there's not much opportunity to learn, certainly not informally.
Mm.
So how do
So,
you encourage it? How do you create difference for people and dissonance in order to learn from that dissonance, disconnect, difference, and so on?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, and I'm going to take a scenario that is graduate scheme. A lot of graduate schemes start in the September period. In fact, a lot of roles at that sort of level start in the September period. Normally, we would put together a learning and development program for graduates that would include working with a mentor, that would include some formalized course, and would potentially include action learning sets. Now, there's no issue with any of those three things. They can do all of that in a virtual world. They can do it through Teams, they can do it through exploration, maybe a Safari search. But they cannot simply look up from their desk and see if their mentor is available for a quick conversation. Because although they can look on Teams to see if they're available or not, they can't literally glance to see if that individual has time. They can't go and do the water cooler moment that says to a colleague, I'm struggling here, because there won't be a water cooler moment. Does that give us any challenge or not?
Of course, it gives us a challenge. Of course, we want to be able to see people. But I think what's really interesting that I've seen is how people are adapting to that challenge right now. I was talking to actually a learning leader in an organisation. It's a small organisation. It's only 200, but they're spread around the globe. And they were finding, obviously, that the situation with the COVID was starting in China. They experienced it with their people over there. Then it moved to Italy. They experienced it there. And they suddenly thought, well, actually, this is a wave that's coming through our company. And they adapted quite quickly to saying, okay, you know, the people in China can help the people in Italy. The people in Italy can help the people in the UK. And they found these purposeful opportunities for connection that were really meaningful. And then they went on from that to actually start to create connections. People could opt in, but they were finding that new people in the organization were saying, yeah, actually, I would like to go on a random meetup. You know, we're being randomly connected with maybe people from the board and people from other countries, just to say hello and to have a coffee, and then people could opt in and use the technology. It's not perfect, and I'm not saying that it is, but it actually has opened up an opportunity for us to have those random connections, those random glances in a new and creative way. But that company had permission throughout the organization. The whole organization said we need to help each other, and they were switched on to wanting to help each other.
So we've discussed this before. It's almost formalizing informal learning.
Yeah. No, I think what Laura's saying is right. There's companies I know who have a permanent Zoom room open that people can just drop into and see who's there. And so I think what's happened is we have moved out of that physical environment and we've lost some stuff. But what we haven't yet learned, many of us, is how to regain similar things, but in the virtual environment. So for example, that water cooler time, yes, there are ways to do it in the virtual world. We're still learning how to do that effectively. And another one, for example, is if you're in meetings, you might end up walking from one meeting room to another for a couple of minutes with a colleague. That's often talking time, which is useful. Yeah, I must catch up with you about that, so on. That's not happening now either, because the Zoom closes, that's it, bang, the meeting's over. There isn't that. So another company I know is actually doing what they call soft and hard starts to their meeting. So the meeting starts at 10, they're doing a 5-minute soft start where it's effectively the same as standing at the coffee table getting your coffee and biscuits before sitting down at the meeting, which hard starts at 5 past or 10 past. So they're actually building some of that into their meeting structure. So it's a matter of learning how to use the virtual world in a slightly different way to regain what we lost that you talked about. So it's not that it's not possible, it's just that we have to learn how to do it.
So, I mean, Gary brings up a point that said, you know, he's saying, and I know that he works near Swindon, that one of his big lessons has been the speed of innovation. You know, most training departments in most establishments have suddenly gone, you know, all of these barriers that have been put in place for years have suddenly been removed, and and were therefore the innovation and the movement has been far quicker. I work quite closely with the University of Lincoln, and I know that they've managed to get nearly all of their work online within very few weeks, and I know that that's happened with a lot of other universities as well. But obviously a lot of that is formalized learning rather than the informal space. And that really brings us to the point Mark was making. Is it different to online learning? Could I just take us back a tiny bit? And can I ask both of you to just give us a definition of your interpretation of this phrase in informal learning?
Well, that's easy. Anything that's not formal.
And that's what
it varies depending on who you speak to, and I get it's a bit like arguing how many angels dance on the head of a pin sometimes as to what is included in informal or formal or whatever, or non-formal or any of the other. So I tend to think of it, there is this kind of rough thing that it's either formal, scheduled, planned, or it's the other, and the other is kind of what we're talking about.
E-learning, which is pulled from the e-learning, is informal training, or are you?
If you're doing it in a planned way, yes, and you're learning, and your outcome from that activity is learning, and learning primarily, then yes, it's formal.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a lovely, if you have a continuum, you can say, well, at one end of the continuum, I know I'm learning and I'm trying to learn, and my outcome from what I'm doing is learning. That's formal, however it's happening. At the other end, you're doing stuff, you're living your life, and the learning is a side effect of what you're doing. That's completely informal, and there's a huge continuum in between where you put so I think it's actually, it's helpful to make that distinction, but to try and say, well, this is formal and that's informal, and when you watch a video, it's always this or that, it's just bollocks, quite frankly.
It's too difficult to pin down.
Yeah.
So Laura, and Laura, you and I have discussed often that change managers often work in the informal space, and communication channels that are used all over businesses often will address informal learning cues in order to embed an idea that maybe has been brought up in training or even in policy and practices. Do you want to add anything to Paul's definition?
Well, I think, because and also come back to your point about should we be formalizing informal, and I think that's a very natural thing that learning and development professionals, we want to be able to do. We want to be able to box, what is it that we do? What can we contribute? And if we can put a structure around something, it allows us to get our heads around it and also to be able to present it to the world. And I think a lot of the work that I had done when I was leading that research program through Towards Maturity and How Emerald Works is to actually say, okay, well, what makes a difference to business? Let's unbox that. And I found that our boxed in thinking of a learning and development professional, we say, is it an e-learning course? Is it formal? Is it online? And it was a great question, that was asked earlier in the chat. Is this different from online learning? And the labels we're putting on things actually really can
not helping.
It doesn't help us to embrace this. And I think the concept of informal learning is the processes that we as individuals go through our own experiences, through our own connections, and through our own making and direction and personal circumstances that are leading us there. And when I was doing research directly with workers, what does that mean? That for me, that was about, the people that I was talking to, it was about their managers, it was about Google, it was about their budgeting system. Sometimes it was about the formal, and I say, actually, these learning pieces which have been structured for me to take me from one path to another, and learning isn't knowledge, learning is actually behavior change, so and we structure interventions to create behavior change. And yet there's been research even from some Dutch academics back in 2014, was talking about that 96% of the way that we do things, we spend out like 490 hours a year picking up new ways of changing our behavior. compared with 21 hours in a formal learning environment.
Yeah, that's insane, isn't it? Yeah.
That's big. Now, okay, what if it wasn't 96%? What if it was only 60%? We need, as learning professionals, to have an increased awareness and an increased ability to say, well, what is our role in that to accelerate change? You know, and Gary was talking about things being accelerated. It hurts. We've all been through what it means to be through an accelerated informal learning. It hurts. And we, you know, it's not that we want someone to feed us a course, but to smooth our journey through.
Let's just expand that a little and bring in Rich's question, because he asks specifically, what does employer engagement do within this digital learning environment, within a virtual world? What's the impact to employer engagement, do you think?
Employer or employee?
Well, employee.
Yeah, I have a view on this.
Well,
all right. Oh, you go.
Well, employee engagement's always a necessary part of any kind of learning, because the relevance of the content, for example, will have a massive impact on whether employees can engage with it or not. So people don't tend to learn without some kind of level of engagement. But I think what's changed is you're asking, how do we do learning in the virtual world? And I think I don't really care so much whether, as I said, whether it's formal or informal. It's more about, as Laura said, what's our ultimate outcome, which really is about behavior change in most instances, unless it's some kind of compliance thing. But if we're looking for behavior change, the question should really be, how do we remotely deliver behavior change? Yeah. And that's very different to how do we put a course into a virtual classroom or something like that, which is the knee-jerk response that a lot of people are doing right now. They've done a lot of stuff very fast. In many cases, they've just saying, of course, how do we get it online? And they do that fast. And the results, if they're really useful, are great, but I have a lot of shortcomings, and those shortcomings won't be tolerable over the longer term. So you've got to step that back and take a question, how do we deliver behavior change, which was always the question, but now we have to say, how do we remotely deliver it? And part of that is always going to be informal learning, because if you're remotely delivering something, much of the learning is happening kind of over there, not where I am as the instructor or facilitator, but over there on somebody else's watch, the line manager's watch, for example. So how do you take it back? And that's something I've been doing a lot of work on recently, is how to rethink that philosophy of redesign to make something fit for remote delivery, which is a different question to how do we put our training online.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Gary's just brought in the fact that he thinks that people are doing far greater research and are far more stimulated than they have been previously because of this. I don't know if you guys found it, but I found that, I mean, we've been in lockdown now for 12 weeks, I'm told. I've lost count, I'm afraid. And I found that the first few weeks that my working days were just full of meetings. I couldn't get any work done because it was meeting after meeting after meeting. It's now slowed down. It's far more what it would have been in a normal world, that I can grab people when I need to, and I can look for information when I need to find it. So I'm not in meetings all the time. I suspect that some of the change that you're talking about will take some time to embed with all types of learner feeling that they have permission to go and explore and develop and research, because not all types of learner will feel that they do have that permission.
Yeah, I think you're right there, and I think this is one of the challenges that we've got with this, with employer engagement. It's less about, you know, whether people will online learning will improve employer engagement, but more about how the company is set up to give permission for that individual to work out new ways of delivering productivity in this new environment. And if that is not a learning opportunity for us as learning and development professionals to support, I don't know what is, but I do feel that there's a real danger. And please forgive me, Paul, because you know I love your work, but I'm going to pick up on one word that you've used, which I think does represent where we have been, but I'm not sure it represents where we need to go. When you talked about us delivering learning, because I think what this new world is flagging, and Gary's flagged it as well, you know, people are researching and searching for themselves. It's our role, should it be purely deliverers, whether it's in an online world or whether it's a face-to-face world, or should our role actually extend within an organization to be enablers, you know, and how do we enable that learning? How do we help those people in Gary's organization who are researching and searching for themselves and finding pathways through? How can we help them help others who are struggling in that space? You know, so that these are different types of roles. It does not negate formal learning, and it does not negate new types of formal learning experiences that can be extended into a work, you know, into the workforce. But it's about creating and living in a world and highlighting a world where that permission for us to grow and change and experiment is okay and is safe. And that's a much organizational issue that I think gives us a brand new playing ground as learning professionals.
So do L&D staff now need to get into big fights with their chief technology officer and their chief information officer to make sure that IT systems will allow the individual to go and search for information in the way that they choose to organically do?
I don't think they're going to get into big fights. I think they can be sometimes the greatest allies. You know, let the workforce be the ones getting into big fights. The L&D can actually surface potentially if they wanted to. It's one of the things that we used to do through our learning landscape work. What's actually going on, you know, behind people's backs, and say and open conversations and present evidence and new conversations that you know, we don't need to take up that fight. That's, you know, that is a that's a workplace thing. But what we can do is amplify what's needed in the workplace and try and open up new conversations about that.
Yeah, because if you're allowing,
what I was getting at when I was saying deliverers, what sorts of things do we have to deliver? Now that might be working with the chief technical officer, it might be making resources available, it might be making curated content available. You know, how do we deliver a place where learning is enabled, but not just learning, but beyond learning into utilization of that learning, so it has, you know, strategy execution impact and things like that. So I wasn't just talking about picking up a bit of learning and saying, here it is in a brown paper bag. I was talking about the whole wider aspect of delivery of an environment and everything else that's required around making something fit for a remote usage in a way.
And I think there are some dangers in this as well. And, you know, Rich has rightly brought us back to the fact that we haven't answered the question about employee engagement. Thank you, Rich, for that. Because there are dangers when we get into how can we deliver, how can we have the fight with the IT, how can we get the systems in place. There's a real danger that we've lived through in other recessions where people have flooded into online because of lack of travel. You know, my own research started as a result of 911 and how many bad experiences people had with technology as a result of, you know, moving into that space when all travel was banned for a while. And I think we can really glut out on technology, and there's a danger, Rich, I think, of if we flood technology without really bringing in what we know works about experiences, about engagement, about design, about the way people learn, about you know, all of these different aspects which we've been surfacing through our research as an industry and academically for a while. If we negate that and just dump everything online, like our tendency has been for the last 30 years, every time there's been a problem, then I will guarantee to you that will have a negative impact on employee engagement, not only with the organization, but definitely with L&D, which is why the NPS scores for L&D, we found this, Josh Burton's found this, have been negative for so long, because we're flooding the market with what we think is a good idea, rather than actually starting from the point of what do people need to do their job better. And that is where, if we can get our heads into that, Rich, that's where we will actually positively impact employee engagement with these tools and our unique perspective on that.
And I think we've discussed this before, because I see a lot of parallels between learning and development specialists and marketing specialists. You know, the starting position should be the needs of the individual. and the needs of the organization that is driving what you're trying to achieve. And I think often we forget that, and you're exactly right. I think that there is a glut of information online at the moment, and some of it won't be particularly good, which is a challenge in itself. And for organizations, I suspect they will still want to do some governance of some of that learning content, to make sure that the standard is there, and that they haven't allowed for a culture that anything goes with regards to learning content. Because if the content is incorrect, then obviously culpability is also placed with the organization. So that's a challenge in itself. It's a completely different challenge, but it's a challenge in itself. Yeah. So is this easier, do you think, for larger organizations than smaller? I mean, the types of organizations you referenced, Paul, at the very beginning, who are doing Zoom hangout rooms, etc., they're probably larger organizations. But is it easy for all organizations to do this, or do you think that the very nature of the larger organizations means that they've got the IT and they've got the capacity to put something, to allow this to happen? Or it actually is the larger or the organization, the more constraints they have because of what they can and can't have on their IT in any case?
I think it's a cultural thing more than a size of organization thing, and just whether people are prepared to experiment, which they seem willing and able to do at the moment. And I think that's the silver lining in this cloud. I mean, there's been a lot of great things have come out of the pandemic, and there's a lot of pain too. And I don't for a minute, say that it hasn't happened, but we also have to look at and I don't care. Whereas previous really changes, matter of saying, well, what's changed that we want to keep, and also what'll happen, and is already starting to happen, is the masters of the old order, whoever they are the people that will try and drag us back to what was, because in some way. So we have to be very careful that we don't get dragged away from the things that we've learned that are beneficial back to an old way of doing things. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think small businesses are better positioned, to be quite honest. They've got the tools, they've got the techniques. If they're still in business and they're already using Zoom, they're already using some of these things. Now, the key thing is as trainers, we don't just come and present to people in a room. It's about, we've got a greater opportunity with small businesses to say, okay, what's the end result? What do we want to achieve? And what are the best ways of us as a team to achieve that together? And I think small businesses, if they're helped, will really be able to flourish in learning in a way that they haven't been able to if they haven't had big budgets and big departments to be able to deliver big LMS systems and big content libraries. I think they might be leading the way for us because they're not constrained by history.
I think there's an interesting, another question as to what proportion of face-to-face training might come back when things are able to be done that way. And so far, most people that I have spoken to who I would respect their opinion have said less than 50%. And I don't know what other people here might think. It'd be interesting to see from the chat who thinks what percentage of face-to-face training will come back when we do get to a point where it can be done. So I think, Laura, you're right. We've got to, changes have already happened, and I think a lot of those will stay there. So we need to be thinking, how can we do things differently in this different world in order to enable what we want to enable out there?
Well, I think it's also that agile piece, isn't it? Take what we're doing well and reinforce it, rather than just go a brand new experiment. Let's, every day is a new day. Well, it isn't in this space. We should be reinforcing success in this space, not every day is a new day. I'm very conscious that we.
Sorry.
I'm very conscious that we always promise these sessions are short and sharp. I know that the three of us could talk for far longer on this subject. I'm going to ask Becky to move us on to our third slide, mainly because I want to point out to everybody that's listening in that Laura has moved to a brand new organisation. So you need to be watching what she's up to. I've followed Laura's work for some time and have always been stunned and impressed by it. It's always my go-to whenever I go to conferences. Paul has written a large number of works on the areas that we've been talking about. Informal learning at work was, I think, one of your latter pieces of work, but it's one of the ones I grabbed very, very early on. Both individuals that we've asked to join us today are very much at the top of their game. So if you've joined us today and not covered these, both of our guests today before, then I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at their work, because it is at the top of the game, and I've always found exceptionally useful. Thank you so much for both joining us this week. Looking forward to what we're up to next week. Well, we've got a completely different subject matter next week. We're looking at CVs, qualifications, and how you do virtual interviews, which is going to become, I guess, an important area for quite a few of us as well. So thank you, Laura. Thank you, Paul, so much for joining us today. Hopefully we'll get to have a cup of coffee at some stage in the near future. But until then, it's a coffee and chat. Thanks a lot. Take care now. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you very much.